The hall was silent, thick with anticipation, every sound swallowed by the weight of the moment. A frail boy, no older than 12, walked slowly toward the podium. His oversized uniform clung awkwardly to his thin frame, and his shoes, scuffed and worn, made soft echoes across the polished floor. He looked too small for the stage, too fragile for the spotlight. Yet, in his trembling hands, he carried a crumpled piece of paper, folded and unfolded so many times that its edges had begun to tear. The crowd expected a nervous, halting speech. Teachers exchanged weary glances, some bracing themselves for stumbles. A few classmates stifled giggles. But then, the boy lifted his head. His eyes, deep, steady, almost luminous, searched the audience, and when he finally spoke, his voice, though cracked and trembling, carried an unexpected strength. "I dedicate this award," he began, pausing as his throat tightened, "not to myself, but to the one who gave up everything so I could stand here today." Gasps rippled through the hall. Mothers clutched their children's hands tighter. A teacher covered her mouth, eyes welling with tears. The boy's words, so simple yet so raw, cut through the air like truth unchained. He turned his gaze to the very back of the hall. There she was, his mother, still in her janitor's uniform, her sleeves dust-stained, her face lined with years of exhaustion and sacrifice. She stood timidly, almost hiding, as if she didn't belong among the polished shoes and perfume of the crowd. The boy raised his medal, hands shaking, but his smile firm. "Mama, this is yours." The hall fell silent again. The giggles were gone. Teachers bowed their heads. Parents wiped their eyes. For in that single moment, a poor boy transformed an ordinary award ceremony into a lesson in love, honor, and the quiet majesty of sacrifice. Flashback. The story of sacrifice began long before the applause, long before the medal. In the dim glow of early morning, Maria rose while the world still slept. She tied her thinning hair, slipped on her faded shoes, and whispered a prayer over her sleeping son, "Let him walk paths I could never walk." Then, with weary steps, she carried her broom to sweep corridors that would never bear her name. By noon, she traded the broom for trays, serving food to strangers whose eyes barely noticed her. The clang of plates, the smell of steaming rice, the rush of orders, it was her second life of the day. Her smile never faltered, even when her stomach growled. At night, she became invisible again, scrubbing office floors while others dreamed. 3 jobs, endless hours, blistered hands, yet all she carried home was hope. Daniel noticed. He noticed the calluses, the faint tremor in her hands, the way she sometimes sat in the dark, too tired to eat. He also noticed her love, the small notes she left in his worn notebooks, the way she placed a hand on his shoulder after a long day. Once, after bringing home a failing math test, he cried silently, ashamed. Maria didn't scold. She knelt before him, placed her rough palm on his cheek, and whispered, "Anik, you can fall. What matters is that you rise again. That's how we honor struggle." That moment became his anchor. From then on, Daniel studied beneath street lamps when the electricity was cut off. He read borrowed books while other children slept. Every page, every word, every answer scribbled in pencil carried not only his dream but hers. Little did Maria know, her unseen sacrifices were slowly weaving a crown of honor on her son's head. Trouble came when no one expected it. One hot afternoon, Daniel was suddenly called to the principal's office. The hallways buzzed with whispers, someone's money had gone missing, and a classmate had pointed the finger at him. Daniel sat quietly, head bowed, as teachers exchanged uneasy glances. The principal sighed heavily. "Daniel, you're bright. But honesty matters. Tell us the truth." His silence only deepened their doubts. He wasn't silent out of guilt, but because his small voice felt powerless against the weight of their suspicion. When Maria arrived, she was still in her janitor's uniform, sweat dripping from her brow. She looked at her son, confused, frightened. "Anik, did you?" Her voice cracked, torn between the faith she held in him and the fear of what people were saying. For the first time, Daniel's eyes filled with tears, not because of the accusation, but because his mother's trust wavered, even for a heartbeat. That night, they sat on the doorstep in silence. Daniel whispered, "Mama, it wasn't me. But I couldn't prove it." Maria held his face, guilt flooding her eyes. "Forgive me, Anak. The world judges the poor before it hears their truth." Days passed under a cloud. Whispers followed him in corridors. Some classmates sneered. But then, the truth broke open. The boy who had lied confessed, his guilt too heavy to carry. Daniel was innocent. At the next assembly, the principal apologized publicly. All eyes turned to Daniel. He could have shouted, demanded justice, even sought revenge. Instead, he smiled gently and said, "Please don't punish him. We all make mistakes." The hall went still. Then, unexpectedly, the boy who accused him wept and hugged him. In that embrace, Daniel's humility outshone every accusation. His honor became undeniable. IME moved quickly, and the boy who once stood accused now stood tall on his graduation day. The hall shimmered with bright banners, flowers, and proud families dressed in their best. Names were called, applause filled the air, but when Daniel's name echoed, valedictorian, the applause grew thunderous. He walked slowly across the stage, his uniform pressed neatly, though still worn at the edges. He carried no arrogance, only the same gentle humility that had carried him through years of hunger and hardship. Holding his speech, his eyes swept across the crowd, but they searched only for one person. There she was, Maria. Still in her janitor's uniform, sitting shyly at the very back. She clapped softly, trying to hide her calloused hands, afraid of being noticed among polished shoes and perfumed clothes. She smiled faintly, but her eyes glistened with quiet pride. Then Daniel began, "My greatest teacher never had a classroom. She had a broom, a mop, and endless courage. Today, I graduate not for myself, but for the woman who walked barefoot so I could run." The hall grew still, then gasps and sobs filled the silence. Some parents wiped tears. Teachers who once doubted him now stood, clapping. Daniel stepped down from the podium, walked straight past the front row, and headed to the very back. He removed his medal, shining under the bright lights, and placed it around his mother's neck. "This belongs to you, Mama." Maria covered her face, her body shaking with sobs. The hall erupted into applause, wave after wave, until it felt like the walls themselves were trembling. The janitor's son had become valedictorian. And for one sacred moment, the invisible mother became the most honored woman in the room. Years passed, yet the memory of that graduation never faded. The boy who once held a crumpled paper at a podium had become a man, his voice and vision sharpened by years of study and sacrifice. On another graduation day, in the very same hall, whispers spread through the crowd, this time not about suspicion or poverty, but about a guest speaker everyone was eager to see. When Daniel walked onto the stage, dressed in a crisp suit, the applause rose like thunder. He paused, humbled, and smiled, not the smile of someone who had made it, but of someone who remembered where he began. "I once stood here as a poor boy," his voice echoed. "I had nothing but my mother's sacrifice. Today, I return, not to boast, but to give back." He took a breath, steady and full of purpose. "I am creating a scholarship in my mother's name, the Maria Foundation. No child should lose their future because of poverty." The hall gasped, then erupted into applause. Teachers wept openly. Parents clapped until their palms stung. Maria, older now, sat in the front row, tears streaming, her trembling hands covering her mouth. Daniel bowed deeply. "Mama, this is all you. Every broom you carried, every night you worked, every prayer you whispered, it built this moment." But the true twist came after his speech. Instead of sitting among officials and honored guests, Daniel walked quietly to the back row, where the janitors stood watching in awe. He took a seat beside them, smiling as if he belonged there. The hall fell silent. Then applause roared louder than ever. The poor boy, once invisible, had become a symbol of humility and hope, bringing every soul in that hall to tears.